Is it just to archive it, or what are your thoughts on that when you cannot delete the data? And of course, GDPR articles, when they say delete, they mean delete. And there are technical issues and many other issues. What are your suggestions?
Well, it really comes down to a couple of things. There may well be additional regulations outside of that, like, for example, financial data, where there's a requirement.
Scott, would you like to say a few words on that?
Yep.
I believe it's just up your alley.
I think everyone can hear me but you again, which is weird. Can everyone else hear me? I'm guessing you can.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Oh. And he's gone again. Not a problem. So, yeah, look, data that needs to be deleted. That's one of those, it's not a gray area, but to be honest with you, I would preferably seek legal counsel when it comes to this, because there are some issues at the moment. So most notably, there are a couple of recent issues in France where a finance, like a brokerage, had to retain data but also had to delete data, and it caused them no end of issues. So it's one of those situations, to be honest with you, where I would actually say, if in absolute doubt, you seek proper legal guidance, and even notify your insurance team if you have privacy related insurance as well from that perspective, because whilst it seems relatively clear, I've noticed that there have been, if you have a quick look on the CNIL's website, there's a few of those examples that have been listed recently. So and they don't particularly make it clear either. So I'm sorry that's not particularly helpful, but I would always say suggest take legal counsel from that standpoint.
Okay, any other comments? If not, then let's go to the next question. And Scott, you can address that also. Differentiating between the critical and non-critical data and the requirements for localization in some of the countries that process the data. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Question number one, how to differentiate between critical and non-critical data? And then question two, after the various GDPR related laws are in effect in other countries, is there a need for creating a data center to meet the requirements of localization in the various countries?
Okay, I'll take question one, and then I'll let someone take sort of the second part of the question. So differentiating between critical and non-critical data comes down to a number of things. It will depend on the type of data that's being captured, how it's being processed, and where it's being stored and transmitted. So once you know all of those different elements, you've got a good indication of what's critical and not critical. The criticality of it obviously depends on the dependence of internal resources or external resources. So from that standpoint, again, from a classification perspective, once you know all of the elements that surround the data, then you'll be able to find what is critical and what isn't, and ensure that you have sufficient controls, protection, process, security by design, privacy by design in place. You can only define it really by knowing what's actually in that data. That's really the most important thing to look at first. But yeah, I would say that as a checklist seems to be a pretty standard approach that a lot of organizations have suggested to take.
Okay, and one final question, Scott, for you before we let you go. How about sharing data? It could be critical data, it could be personal data and other types of data on the social media.
Yeah, that's a trap. So yeah, this is look. There was a very recent issue where a grandmother posted pictures of her grandchildren, and even though it was completely personal, not related to any business services or anything else like that, under GDPR, she was forced to take it down, or she would have to pay a certain fine daily until the pictures were taken down, and she'd be fined new amounts of money for every time she posted any more. That puts us in very new and uncharted territory when we look at the personal aspect. So if you look at it from a business standpoint, look, the reality is if you don't have permission or you don't have the correct legal basis, then there's no point. Unless it fundamentally serves your risk appetite is ridiculously high, and it fundamentally serves such a business benefit from your perspective that it's warranted to take the risk, then look, play it safe, because if we've got new case law already in such a short period of time where members of the public are being affected by GDPR, then I fully expect from the business side of things momentum to gain significantly off of the back of this. So I think someone like Renza probably will know better than I will on this, and I'll probably hand over to her to give you her opinion.
Well, it's
Right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it, and let's hear from the other speakers if there is anything more to add. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case. So we have a couple of more minutes before we let you go. Let me ask you another question. Are there any derogations on the transfer, on the cross-border transfer, when it comes to compliance with GDPR? Scott, did you have anything to add there?
Look, I'll be completely honest with you. I am not a derogations expert, so I'm probably not the person to ask on this one. Sorry. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Imports? No.
No. Kirsty, can you hear me?
Sure.
Yeah, I said I would probably let someone else take this question, because I'm not a derogations expert. I'm not quite sure what exceptions are put into place or exemptions.
But derogations in which field, in which specific field? What is the case?
Yes, Lorenzo mentioned it depends what kind of data and where do you want to send it to. One of our biggest challenges has been to make sure that you can send this type of data to the third-party country or to just cross the border within the European constellation, because everyone has different national laws as well.
It depends. Well, derogations
True, and there can be no derogations because I don't know who has the authority to give any exceptions to the rules of the GDPR.
I agree with Kirsty. If a derogation applies, you have to respect it. You can get it otherwise. You've got to respect it, and the only way is to ask for consent. But normally this applies if you transfer the data from Europe to the outside countries, to the countries outside Europe. So as far as you are in Europe, you have to see if there are the guarantees or if a derogation may apply. From another country, I don't think it's GDPR is not applicable.
Just about prøv at refresh. 5.
So, Kimi, did you have anything to add to the last questions?
No, I think I've said enough. If you could hear me.
Yes.
Ja, slå på lyd.
We lost Kelsey.
Yeah. Yeah, but in general, I think it's important to be aware of where you want to send data and what kind of data at least. Yeah, I think we lost him.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully not. There is a Reddit panel now. Oh, here he is.
He'll come back in a moment.
Go ahead, Lady Olga.
No, I was just going to ask, I was just filling in the gap for you in case you needed to reconnect. But I think actually, as we're beginning to get into wrap-up time, perhaps we might have some conclusions about what people feel they've heard during today, or their kind of final kind of takeaway message. I was just thinking, Lorenzo, you were full of very practical advice about how to handle the breakout for freedom and all the problems that will happen with it. And you're the first person I've seen who's given a real template. I haven't seen it anywhere else. Perhaps it's a case of Italy leads and the world follows. You've got a huge amount of experience. So your slides are going to be really important to us. Maybe you might add any more about how difficult it will be to implement all these very demanding rules and who's going to enforce them.
I'll try to draft an extra document, a more complete one and practical one for you. I will share it in a couple of days. Just have to think about it and draft sort of an integrated document, COVID and GDPR. So it might be of general interest and hopefully useful for everyone who is in the case.
I think it will have a much wider audience than you think. And I think it'll be very, very valuable. Anyway, from your point of view in the publishing world,
it's a bit of a problem for us as well, because here our legislation is changing. Then we have government legislation, region legislation. It's sort of a mess.
I would imagine they overlap and contradict each other.
Yeah, of course.
But we're having that in the UK. The rules change every day as to what we may do. And sometimes they do a U-turn, so we never quite know. Yeah. It's a matter of trying to keep very calm. It's very difficult.
Yes, problems as usual are sanction. The clients are exposed too, because I can't give anything for granted in this moment.
But also the sanctions upon people breaking the rules are very variable. In one part of the country, in the UK, they're very tough. In another part, we don't see the police at all. I don't know whether, Kimi, you've got any thoughts, because you cover a very wide field in publishing and newspapers, and you've gathered a huge amount of
it's very different. Yeah, it's very different from country to country, I would say. Since we are media, we actually half of our business is not even within the GDPR, because in Denmark, if you publish for medias, then you don't have to think about it. But then all the ones that we have in Norway, it's completely different. And we can also, on Germany, that's completely different as well. So we have to try to understand all of them. And I would also say that the authorities in the different countries they do things so differently, like the way that they do inspections. And also, as you mentioned, the way that they do the fines. Even if it can be for the same thing, it's completely different. And I would also say that the Danish authorities, they changed the way that they do it. For a year ago, they might have said one thing, and then they changed it completely now. That something that was a fine a year ago is now just critique. And Denmark is also very different, because we have actually changed it. Like the Danish authority data center cannot give the fines. It has to go to the police. which is really different from the rest of the European countries. So the data, like the Danish data authorities can say, we want to give this fine, and then the police can actually change it. It hasn't happened yet, but it's just to understand that there's a difference in the way that we do it. Yes, it also changes a lot. At least we can see on all the cookie regulations.
Oh my God.
We also, yeah, but in Denmark we also have another authority that handles all the cookies. So that's really, really different, and it changes all the time. We thought we were compliant a year ago, and now the Danish data authorities came with a new verdict. So now we have to change everything. So I completely agree that it's hard to just say now we're done, because then they change their mind.
And cookies are a very sensitive issues all around the world.
A lot of
I
sensitive
hate that personally.
Yeah.
They are worse than gremlins. They multiply.
And also so many different interpretations of one particular ruling, which is the other thing. And nobody really quite knows where to actually step, because you get conflicting views. So we are into a sort of bit of a pathfinding process. I would imagine a year from now, mercifully, we will have learned a huge amount and moved on. But right now, whether it's enforcement on GDPR, and I must say, I think one of the themes I've been hearing today is you have the GDPR process, you have the enforcement process, but actually there is no real energy in that area right now, because people are so diverted in resources and emotional energy, physical energy, and time onto other issues. Then you have, you know, a major cyber attack, like for instance, one of our airlines. You know, we're hit. Well, this happens all the time. People are more vulnerable, but I'm not sure we're coming up with easy solutions at all. It does mean, I think the lesson to any company is to understand the importance about preparedness and investing in general terms. Yeah. And I agree with all our various speakers, trying to get it properly into the boardroom and to get them to really understand it. They give lip service, but when you ask the chief financial officer to dip into his pocket and pay for it, then they reject it. And then when something is especially wrong, then they think again. So I think this is, again, a problem. I think to be an ambassador for proper compliance is still hard work. Any other thoughts? Kirsty?
No, it doesn't seem so. Let's try to wrap it up. And of course, please interrupt me if you have any comments. But it seems that the GDPR problems that we consider essentially does not have one right answer. And the GDPR issues can be approached from several equally valid perspectives. And therefore, it is not like a multiple choice answer that you choose the best of the options that you have. You have to choose the right of the best options that you have. And that is a distinction that requires a lot of knowledge and experience in taking care of the GDPR issues. We don't want, of course, to say that it is very difficult and very impossible and very complicated and very complex and so on, because it is specified in the many articles that we have how we need to do it. But the problem occurs of the conflicting interests that can be in the organization and the conflicting approach depending on who speaks the loudest. I have seen organizations where the HR department, for example, if that is a department that has full control of the data, of the personal data, they take the lead. And I've seen other companies where it is the IT department that takes the lead because they are so central in the GDPR implementation. And then there are other organizations that have the legal department who are on the driver's seat. And of course, we need to find in a way so that all of the different opinions of the various perspectives are understood at an equal level, so that there is no one person who is first among equals. Because GDPR requires you to deal with more than one option, because there are several options. And depends on the level of experience that the organization has on other compliance activities and other compliance perspectives. And you need to kind of take into consideration that experience from the different stakeholders that are there in the organization. But primarily, as I said earlier, 80% of GDPR, or maybe 70% of GDPR, is information security. Some people don't agree with me, but that's fine too. But this is what I feel, because you get your processes, you get your structures taken care of based on the articles. You can read them, you can figure out how you need to do it, and then implement it. That's probably the easy part, because that's more formality and that's more structure and so on. But when it comes to information security, there are many other things involved, both the legal, both the aspect, both the technical, and so on. So this is where the problem occurs. And then, of course, we don't have to forget the global component. We talked about Africa and the regulatory patchwork that there is there, 54 countries, and King Edward, or Edward King. Thank you very much for your presentation, very detailed, and so was Paula Aravena's presentation on LATAM, on the South American issues, and so on. So we've gone through a number of different areas that we have had 15 speakers from 9 different countries who we went through the coronavirus issues, to the risk gaps, the impact of digitization involving all of the stakeholders. We went on the risk management and the critical IT infrastructure. And then we had this new thing called effectuation, and how can effectuation inspire the transformation. And then we had an update on the GDPR landscape across the EU, and of course the three presentations from 3 different continents in half hour. And we went through the GDPR journey in the Danish telephone company, Dansk Cable TV. And then, of course, the global organization of Specsavers, with Lena talking about the DPIA into business processes, and then minimizing risk from a privacy perspective from Kimi. And of course, finally, the star of the day was Lorenza Villa, our Italian friend, who really went into much detail on a number of different issues. And we look forward to your plan that we will share with the audience. But even though, when we have gone through so many different concepts and perspectives on GDPR, it's not over. We will continue with this series. We call it the GDPR reboot series. How to reboot and get on the level 2 and level 3 of the GDPR compliance. So every second Wednesday from 2:30 to 4:30, followed by a Q&A session. So it will be a 2.5-hour session every second Wednesday of the month. And we have already made a plan for the topics that we are going to discuss. Most of the topics have come from you, all the participants that have raised questions and responded to some of the surveys that we have conducted. And let me quickly go through the subjects that we will be talking about. On the 10th of June, we will be talking about the data subject request. And we call it the full Monty, because we will go through all of the different aspects of the data subject request, from their rights and their obligations, and the data controller and the data processor obligations with connection with the data subject request. On the 8th of July, we will be talking about structured and unstructured data, the data source and the data transactions. We will be addressing the issues of data wrapping, big data, machine learning, data lake, all these new fancy things that are coming up. So that's on the 8th of July. On the 12th of August, we will be talking about GDPR, data privacy, data security, IT, and cybersecurity in relationship with the ISO standards. We will go through a number of ISO standards and see how these influence on the ongoing processes of cybersecurity and GDPR compliance, and how can companies adjust with the GDPR impact using the ISO standards as a guidance. And then we will talk about redefining cybersecurity awareness on the 9th of September. That will include phishing and cybercrime and the current trends and challenges. And we will have a case on recovering from a data breach, how to get a backup, how to get the recovery, and what are the learnings and the best practices and scenario planning and so on, everything about a data breach. And then on the 14th of October, we have enterprise data storage, best practice and management. What happens when the unthinkable happens? What are the consequences and how do you address that? And cope with ransomware attacks that always makes headlines when this is a problem. So this is the structure of our next subjects as far as the GDPR reboot series is concerned. So with that, I would like to thank you all participants. We have registered more than 400, and we have been more than 100 at any one given time. So that is very nice. And of course, it's all over the world, so it's truly international. That's the way we like it to be, because GDPR is not only in Europe. GDPR is data privacy, GDPR is data protection, IT and cybersecurity, as a global gold standard, which is the de facto legislation of the world. So with that, thank you very much, Lady Olga. Maybe you would like to wrap up. You did it so very well. Thank you very much. And you spent your bank holiday with us. We appreciate it. Maybe you would like to say a few words, and then we will wrap it up.
Well, I'd just like to say to all the participants, thank you very much indeed for really sharing your experiences. And in many ways, our problems are the common. In other ways, they're slightly different, but we all have equal number of challenges. And I think this is enormously helpful, because unless you realize that you're not operating in isolation, that other people are in the same situation, you can't kind of way forward. But at the moment, there's no doubt about it, there's more fog than clarity. But what Klaus has been trying to do, and what you have all been trying to do, is try and give some solutions about how to move forward over the next 6 months, 12 months. And I think this is a very, very pertinent and timely seminar today. And I thank Kirsty and all the participants for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Kirsty. And
Thank you very much, and have a nice evening. I look forward to seeing you all on the 10th of June. And also thanks to Christian, who led us through the whole day, and all the presentations and the technique and so on. So once again, thank you all, and have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Kirsty.
Bye. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Så lukker vi den ned. Skriv lige et eller andet. Tak for i dag, og have a nice evening.